All right, friends, how's it going? It's Matty listening to the Looking Sideways Action Sports podcast, episode 117 to be exact. It's the show where I try and uncover the most interesting stories in action sports and other related endeavours. Thanks for checking this one out. It's the third episode of my Kerno Omnibus and my interview with celebrated longboarder Mike Lay, which I recorded up at Wheel Kitty in St Agnes a few weeks before the world went to, well, shit, really. Incidentally, my thanks to the guys at Open Surf up at Wheel Kitty because they generously let me use their space to record this episode, which was right neighbourly of them. So thanks, guys. So, one of the weirdly unexpected things about this simultaneously hyper-accelerated and radically paused life we're all living right now is how quickly things can become a cliche. The word unprecedented, heartfelt yet slightly cheesy messages and emails from businesses that you'd forgotten existed. Instagram Live, guilty of that. Articles about home working tips, also guilty. The phrase, it seems like a lifetime ago, massively guilty of that one. Used it the other night, nearly used it then, in fact. And yet, this conversation with Mikey Lay, well, it does really feel like a lifetime ago. I mean, for a start, we were allowed outside. Secondly, the sun was shining, although obviously the sun has been shining this week, which has been bloody lovely. The coffee was fantastic. Thanks again, Open Surf. And the conversation with somebody I'd just met the day before, in fact, I'd only met him that day, what am I even talking about, was undeniably fantastic. So I'm already holding this one close, and I hope once you've heard it, you will too, because Mikey Lay is a bit of an extraordinary individual. He's an outstanding longboarder. I'm going to say one of the best these islands have ever produced, as his status as one of Reef's main players alongside peers such as Rob Machado and Mick Fanning surely demonstrates. But he's also a creative, a dreamer, a reader, a writer, above all a thinker. God, that was getting perilously close to that T.E. Lawrence quote everybody's always banging on about on Instagram. But those are the reasons that I really wanted to speak to him. As regular listeners will know, people who are amazingly good at sliding sideways and are also able to see beyond the margins of our insular little world. Well, that's pretty much the criteria by which I choose guests. And that's why I was so keen to speak to Mikey. And I'm very glad I did, because this conversation soon took off into some unexpected regions. And what I really liked about this was Mikey's willingness to recognise the great good fortune of his position and how level-headed his perspective on the whole thing is. I mean, I've been working in this game for an astonishing almost 30 years now. And self-entitled pro athletes are as common as double-header Instagram live interviews currently are. So when you meet somebody like Mike, who is considered and has opinions about the whole daft farrago, I reckon they're worth chatting to. So that's what I did. And it was great, as I think you're going to hear. I'll be back at the end with a bumper housekeeping corner. But in the meantime, here's me and Mike Lay. Enjoy. All the professionals have stands and studios. I always rock up with this little ghetto.
I like this.
Little ghetto arrangement, and you know, I have to go through the instructions. But yeah, it seems to work. So how you doing, man? You all right?
I'm very well, thank you, Matt.
Yeah, nice to see you.
Good to see you too.
Yeah, thanks for coming. So we are Wheel Kitty in our friends Sideways. Nice spot, isn't it?
It's a lovely spot. Yeah, they've got a good thing in this whole complex. They've got lots going on.
Yeah, it seems to have expanded. Every time I come up here, there's like a new shaper or there's a new coffee shop, or, you know. Yeah, it's good, man. And you're off to Mexico.
Yeah.
Tomorrow.
Yeah, so we're driving up to the airport tonight, staying over, and then off with the Finisterre crew. Yeah. To Mexico, yeah.
And where are you off to?
To Sayulita, which is in the region of Nayarit. We're going to see my friend Israel, who is kind of the fixer for the shoot, but he organises a contest called the Mexi Log Fest. So okay. I kind of linked Finisterre up with him.
Right.
Yeah, some beautiful waves.
Nice.
Place, yeah.
So it's a shoot, basically.
Yeah, it's their summer range. So board shorts and bikinis, hence the long distance.
Nice. I'm pretty jealous because we're in the middle of, what is this, storm? Jorge.
Yeah, we've got to J.
I believe.
Feels like we've been rattling through the alphabet faster than normal.
I'm staying at Watergate Bay, and yeah, I was just saying, I was like, try surf for a few days, but I don't think I'm surfing. It's pretty onshore and pretty wild. Yeah. But how's your winter been? Good?
Yeah, it has been good.
You had a few waves?
Yeah. Lucky in living in West Cornwall.
Yeah, you're down in Sennin, obviously.
Yeah, I actually live in a village called Pendeen, which is just sort of 5 minutes from Sennin.
Yeah.
But we got a lot of options there for when it does get stormy, so it's a good place to be.
Yeah, and you were saying that you've dodged a bullet on the coronavirus tip. You basically had, by the sounds of it, the perfect itinerary through which to come down with coronavirus,
yeah.
And then suffer that. So you were supposed to go to China, is that right?
Yeah.
And then you were going to go to Australia. Yeah. So what was the plan? What happened?
I was, I had this really, it was the perfect, now it seems like the perfect way to contract coronavirus and be in quarantine for the rest of the year. But at first it seemed like the perfect way to earn a bit of money, see my friends in Australia, then go to Mexico and come back. So I was meant to be training the longboard team in China. The Chinese longboard team? Yeah, I think actually it's a regional longboard team. One of the regional governments was actually paying for it. Right. But they've got a whole program which is, I think, in one way or another, state sponsored. Yeah, they're really throwing money at. Well, I didn't realise they were doing it with surfing, but I know they're doing it with snowboarding and winter sports and it's state funded as well. Because I went to China 4 years ago, and they held the World Snowboard Championships there, and it was one of them where, like, obviously, clearly the Chinese government had just offered a shitload of money to hold this event there. And it was in the middle of nowhere. It was basically in Mongolia, really, like where this resort was. And anyway, it was on state TV. So it was watched by 1 billion people. And, you know, when I was there to write a story for a snowboarding magazine. And when I was talking to people there, it was like, basically the government is they've got this like 10, 15 year, 20 year plan. They're investing in ski resorts. They're investing in athletes, they're investing in infrastructure, and it sounds by all accounts like that's what's going on with surfing as well then. Yeah, I think so. I don't know what metric they judge a sport kind of by its potential for success, but they've obviously done it with snowboarding and done it with surfing, and they've built their own wave pool. Yeah, they have. Yeah, they've got their own wave pool that they train at. Are they arguing about what technology is best as well? Yeah, probably. yeah, whether it's best to have like a punt section at the end or something. Yeah, they got like anguished blogs about what it's going to do for the future of surfing. Yeah, existential rants about ocean and fresh water. Yeah, but yeah, they're just ploughing money into it, and I one of my friends, who's also my shaper, Mitch, he's been helping to train them in Australia because they fly to Australia, and anyway he couldn't do it in China, so I was going to go over for a month, get paid, they were going to fly me there, then fly me to Australia, I was going to pick up some boards, go to Mexico, do this shoot, come home. All fell through. I was a bit gutted, and then 1 or 2 weeks later global pandemic strikes, and I dodged a bullet. Yeah, definitely, because you were going to go to Noosa after that then. Yeah, for that event. I was meant to do the. Well, I don't know. There's a whole thing which is probably another conversation about professional longboarding, the WSL's drive to include single fin longboarding. Yeah. So I would have probably gone out and maybe done that, maybe not. I'm still undecided about where I fit into it all. Really? So in what way? Well, maybe if you could explain what so they've brought Devon Howard in, right, to kind of oversee the WSL longboard tour, and that was quite recently, right? It was like last year. Yeah. And so they've tried to open it out, basically. Yeah. Well, there's been, for the last 10 years, maybe, there's been a lot of soul searching in longboarding about what kind of equipment a longboarder should be riding, what sort of manoeuvres someone should be doing on a longboard. And since sort of the early 90s, people were riding quite lightweight 2+1 setup longboards. And then at the start of the noughties, a couple of films by Thomas Campbell, one in 1999 called The Seedling, and then The Sprout a couple of years later, kind of heralded the resurgence of single fin longboarding, with Joel Tudor as the kind of figurehead of that movement. Yeah. And then Joel has been pushing for that movement, the single fin longboarding movement, to take precedence over the high performance style. I was going to say you could call it performance style, right? Yeah. So it's called High Pro is the
Yeah, and he's like he's a man who knows his surf history. Let's put it that way.
He does,
and he knows what he thinks is the right path. I think you can say, can't you? You know.
Yeah, and he's very unflinching and inflexible in his view of what good longboarding should be.
Yeah, which he's done his own events, obviously, where he's tried to sort of like forward that. Yeah, which you've taken part in, right? The duct tape.
I've done one of his duct tapes in Huntington, which was really fun. And those events also, I don't know whether they gave birth or at the same time a kind of a global network of similar single fin events sprung up. There's one here called Smooth Movers.
Yep.
And there was James Parry did one called the Hip Wigglers here, and then there's the Mexi Logfest, which I mentioned earlier. One in New Zealand, one in Portugal. There's lots of events like that which I really enjoy going to and competing loosely in. And that's where now the paths of professionalism in the WSL with Devon Howard, they're taking that ethos of single fin longboarding but bringing it into
the WSL context.
And lots of, I think it's definitely a good thing, but I just don't know whether I am gonna be part of that.
What as in you've got your reservations about that, or?
I don't know. I'm not sure. I think there was the whole, for me, I rode high performance longboards when I was younger because that's all I knew that there was. We're kind of isolated in West Cornwall and maybe in the UK in general from any surf culture really. But I stopped riding high performance longboards, started riding single fins as it was kind of anti-competitive. It was just like, just enjoy yourself.
Right.
And it's
was that quite an early thing for you then?
Yeah. I was 16. But then it's funny because there's contradictions. Like I moved into the open category of the British Longboard Union tour. So the BLU tour was the framework which young longboarders competed in, and I was in the juniors, and me and my friend Matt and my other good friend Trev, who's from St Agnes, we would just win all the comps together. We'd take turns winning, and then you get into the seniors and we weren't winning.
Right.
And I wasn't enjoying it as much because winning's more fun than losing.
Than not winning.
Yeah, exactly. So I just thought, bugger this, I'm just going to ride single fin longboards now.
Right, okay. So it was a bit linked to kind of an expression thing and like getting away from that overly competitive approach, let's say. Right.
So then my whole surfing up to now has been kind of not very competitive and very enjoyable as a result of that lack of competition.
How old were you when you made that call then?
I said I was 16, but actually I was 18.
Right. And that was a conscious thing then? That was like...
Yeah, but then also I was just... James Parry, who's from Senin as well, he stopped riding high-performance boards, and I was just like... My friend Matt and I, who grew up the same age surfing longboards, we just did what James did.
Yeah. He was the local... Like, he was your mentor, as it were.
Yeah, totally. And he's only... I mean, he's maybe 4 years older than us, but he stopped it.
When you that formative age, that's quite a big age difference though, isn't it? When you're in your early teens or whatever.
So we had that age difference, but also we were with him all the time. We were surfing with him all the time. He would take us to all the contests, and he was kind of laying the path for us as surfers. So when he started riding single fins, we were like, right,
that's what we're going to do.
That's what we're doing. Yeah. So it was, that led to a conscious decision to stop doing competitions, just because that seemed to be... you couldn't ride single fins in events, or it felt like you couldn't at that time.
Yeah.
The judging criteria was so skewed towards high performance longboarding that you wouldn't succeed on a single fin.
So you just dipped into these competitions that represented a little bit more longboarding as you saw it, as they started to flourish then, like the ones you've outlined. And because we were talking before we started recording, and I was kind of saying, like, what's interesting about your career path is you've gone off on your own direction, really, and you've kind of described the foundations of it there, and you have been able to like pursue that, so it appears, and make it, like a career as a inverted commas free surfer. You know what I mean? Like you've not had to compete. You can travel and you can film and you can do that thing, but it's not the most common path for British surfers, really. So There's a couple of things to talk about with that. One of which is perhaps it is common with big wave surfers because it's necessary in that. But for what you do, it isn't that common. So did you, when you started to make these choices and make this decision, did you like feel it was a viable path that you could do? Did you want to try and make a career out of it? Or were you just like, this is the most fun, I'm just going to keep doing that?
Yeah, I think when I started riding single fin longboards and not competing, there was making a career out of surfing was the last thing in my mind. It was just not... I
mean, I thought that's what you'd say. Yeah, because I can't imagine it was like on careers night.
Yeah.
It was like,
why are you surfing longboard?
You could do this.
Yeah, totally. It was not. It was just so far away from being financially viable. Not even that I was thinking about terms such as financial viability. I was just surfing.
Yeah. Were there any people that you saw doing it though at that age? From here, obviously, there's countless people in the States and Australia, and
Yeah, I guess. Well, someone we've spoken about James, but Sam Bleakley's from Senin as well.
Yeah, and again, he's a bit older, right?
Yeah. He's probably another 4 or 5 years older than James, so maybe 10 years older than me, but bit more than that maybe. But he was the first person I really looked up to, and actually maybe he planted the seed of the idea of having a career in surfing, but taking it through a more... Sam did it in an intellectual route maybe, but using writing and travel and
filmmaking.
Culture. Yeah, filmmaking now is definitely a big part of what he does, but he's got 2 or 3 European titles, and he won 2 of them while studying at Cambridge.
Yeah.
And when I was at school, I did well at school, and that I was more of an academic person probably than looking down a competitive route. So Sam's way of doing things really appealed to me.
Was an inspiration.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I remember in French, actually, when I was probably 12 or 13, they asked to do a profile of a celebrity.
Right.
And
you did Sam.
French. I did Sam.
Brilliant. Yeah. That's great.
Yeah.
So he gave you a bit of a, because obviously you write as well, and creative expression is a big part of what you're doing as well. So he was one of the people that you kind of looked up to and thought, maybe there is a way.
Yeah, totally. And I went to university and I studied creative writing and English literature. And when I'd finished university, I'd been lifeguarding in the summers and surfing a lot in the summers, but then going back to university. And when I finished, my girlfriend and I thought our lives probably lay in London. She was a musician, and I was thinking about maybe getting a job in publishing or something like that. Surfing wasn't a career option. Yeah. At that stage, and lots of lucky things fell into place.
Yeah. Did you try and do that?
No, didn't get to that point.
Right.
It didn't get to that point. I basically, I'll tell you the story of how it came about, but I was just lifeguarding at Senin, and the head of reef in Europe happened to be an English guy called Nathan Hill, and it's quite rare for an English person to be in charge of a European surf brand. And he was on holiday with his kids, and I think I met him. He had a friend called Russ Pierre who they knew from surfing in Brighton or something. I'm not really sure how it came about, but anyway, I got a phone call from him a month after he'd left and asked me if I wanted to be sponsored by Reef. And at the time I didn't I was just like, yeah, sure. Great. Right. And that relationship grew with his influence in the brand on a global scale as well as a European scale. That grew into a career. Right.
So, I mean, you need that though, don't you? You need those kind of like, if you want breaks, but also like the mentorship, as well as somebody that can show you a way of doing it. It's really important.
Yeah, totally. And I think Nathan, my career now is 100% down to him. He's the reason that I've managed to lead such an amazing life up to now, or amazing in a kind of worry-free surfing all the time, going on holiday sense.
I mean, I'd say that would fit most people's definition of amazing.
Yeah. I mean,
especially listening to this
in quite a self-absorbed, like selfish way. It's quite.
Did any part of you regret the fact that you didn't? Because obviously you've tried to fulfill your intellectual and creative ambitions in tandem with this, but was there any part of you that kind of feels like you haven't fulfilled the potential on that side to the degree that you perhaps know that you could do?
I think so, yeah. I think there is. Just because surfing for me, I love surfing so much, and it's such an addictive thing for me that it almost pushes everything else out of the way. And especially I'm in such a fortunate position where I don't necessarily need to work. Surfing is my main source of income, and I'm just at home, and every day I'm thinking about going surfing, and that kind of crowds out. Not entirely, like I still write a lot, and writing's the cornerstone of my surfing career as well. It's how I operate in kind of a content creation.
Right. So as in like writing for magazines?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But it definitely, I feel like I have more work to do in that world. Yeah,
I think I kind of understand what you mean there, which is why I asked the question really. Because if you're lucky enough to, I mean, this is like get out the world's tiniest violin / first world problems territory, isn't it? You know what I mean? Like, but it is interesting because I think everybody feels like they have an amount of potential that, you know, deep down, and I don't just mean, you know, if you might have like literary pretensions or whatever, but just everybody really has an understanding of like what for them feels like potential fulfilled. And physically, obviously you've done that, but that doesn't mean, and clearly surfing provides you with mental nourishment as well, as you've just explained. But I think they can be quite different, and it can be quite difficult to balance them if you know, especially if you said it sounds like you had a pretty strong academic grounding and saw yourself going on a particular path, you know. So I can understand, like, and it's probably quite easy for you doing like surf journalism and writing those stories, and you know. So yeah, just because you write poetry as well, right? Because I chatted to Jack Johns about always trying to do a little bit of digging beforehand, and he was like, "Oh, I think I met him at a poetry reading." Like, so you know, you write poetry and you do recitals and stuff. Is that something that you're still doing?
Yeah, that is, and that's my kind of main creative output is poetry. I haven't done a recital in a while. That's probably one of the things that has taken a back seat.
Yeah.
As I've been chasing surfing for the last few years, but I write poems all the time. But it's funny poetry because they just get written and then that's it. At the moment, it's a less obvious. There's a less obvious path to getting your work out there with poetry. I think for a number of reasons, it can feel it's quite a hard thing just to read someone your poems.
Well, it's I would say, as like, you know, all creative expression is very revealing. That's a fucking glib thing to say, but you know what I mean? Like, you're putting a bit yourself out there, and that takes courage. You know, if you write a song and sing it to someone, if you write a story and get someone to read it. And I would say writing a poem is like very much at the pointy end of that. You know, it's especially even, it's not that fashionable. You know, it's not like everyone's sat around writing poems. Everyone's sat around writing Instagram captions, but they're not writing poems. So you're putting yourself out there, aren't you? You know, and but that's something you've always done and not been too fazed by.
Yeah. I didn't do it at all up until I started university. That was when poetry became something that I remember the first lecture of poetry, which was part of my creative writing degree. I remember having one idea in my head, and we were set a task to, I think it was probably something more complicated, but come back next week with a poem.
Yeah.
And I just remember being terrified. I was like, I've got one idea.
Right.
I can't just spunk it now on the first thing.
Yeah. Is it good enough?
Yeah, exactly. Or like, I'll just write it down, then that's it.
Yeah.
That's my idea. So that being at university gave me the freedom gave me the confidence to have ideas, I think, and poetry turned out to be the way that I expressed them.
Right.
But I felt like a writer at university, not a surfer. And then that there's gradually been a transition, I think, from feeling like a writer and a poet to now being a surfer who writes a bit of poetry sometimes.
Yeah. Has that affected your self-image?
I don't know. How do you mean self-image?
Well, you know, like, again, that if you, because presumably like that expression is an important part of you feeling good about the world, and again, feeling like you're fulfilling things creatively. So if that's taken a bit of a back seat, is that is that kind of something that's worried you, or are you just a bit like, that'll come back and this is the way that life is right now?
No, I think it definitely does. I wouldn't say worry me, but I'm aware of work that has to be done in the future.
That's what I'm getting at.
That ground, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's interesting with surfing, speaking to, through my sponsorship with Reef, I've been really lucky to hang out with some amazing surfers like Rob Machado and Taylor Knox, and surfers who have achieved a great deal within surfing. And the way they talk about surfing, it occupies a far more important space in their minds than I feel it occupies in mine. Like I see it as a pastime and something that I really love, but it doesn't necessarily have much depth to me, whereas it does for guys like that. And I think that's probably because they're far more involved with it, and maybe because they're culturally in a space geographically where it carries more weight to be a professional surfer or an athlete, or to come second in the world as Rob did. But
where they come from, I mean, it is the culture, isn't it?
Yeah.
That is the culture.
Yeah.
Especially like where Rob comes from, and Taylor as well.
Yeah.
Like that. I mean, I've interviewed both of them and hung out with them where they live. And you see the immersion of that world, and like how. Yeah, I mean, it is like that is the culture. So you can see that. But you said earlier that you're obsessed by it. And you said earlier that you're like, I can't remember the phrase you used, but you basically said it dominates your life. So
yeah, it does.
Kind of sounds like, what's the difference?
Well, I think that's the contradiction that I grapple with, is that I am totally obsessed with it, and I'm obsessed with all of it. Like, I like watching shortboarding events. I like seeing who's where in the rankings. I watched the WSL event in Noosa. And then on a local scale, I check the forecast all the time. I want to surf every day, the best place that I can go surfing. Like, it's totally all absorbing. But then there's another thing in my head saying, this is just, there's nothing to this.
Yeah.
Other than kind of just a selfish chasing of a feeling.
Yeah. I know exactly what you mean. But sometimes there's probably nothing wrong with that, really, is there?
Yeah. Then there's another part of my head that goes, doesn't matter about it.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that. Do that.
Yeah. Well, at least you're aware of it, though.
Yeah.
Is that a good thing to be aware of that?
I think so. I need to turn that awareness. I feel like I need to use that awareness as a fuel to maybe ignite the other parts of my life that I see more potential value in. But I don't know where I'm getting these judgments of value on. I don't know why writing good poetry would be more valuable than surfing.
Yeah, I mean, and again, I think it's just for me, and this is why I framed it in this way earlier, it just comes down to the way that you perceive yourself, the way that you perceive your self-image, really, if that makes sense, and what feels like success to you as an individual. And they're just different for everybody, aren't they? For a lot of people it is just, and I'm the same, I admire that single-mindedness. Like, I've got friends that have we've all got them, just dedicated their lives to like one thing, and that might be snowboarding, that might be surfing, and that's all they give a fuck about, and that's all they're going to do. And this part of me really admires that. I mean, that's not me, but but sometimes I do get jealous of that.
I feel like with my particular form of surfing, though, it's like longboarding is an inconsequential, easy thing for me to do now. Like, there's no, other than just every day enjoying myself. Yeah. There's nothing to achieve. With someone like we were talking about Tom earlier, but Tom Lowe, he has an image of this incredible massive wave that he wants to surf, and there seems like a
goal.
A degree of completion and there's something to aim for. Right. But I just feel like there's not much to aim for other than me having a good time, which feels like something that, why would you? Yeah,
that makes sense. Yeah. I mean, and that brings us back to what we were talking about earlier with that career path for UK surfers thing. Because you look at those boys, and I guess you almost need that focus and that drive to get to this point, whatever it is, to do what they do, really? Because especially someone like Tom, who's obviously wired in a very particular way to be doing what he's doing. Is that something that you've noticed then from conversations, by the sounds of it, with Tom and people that have those ambitions in surfing, that it is very much like a, there's a focal point, there's a goal?
Yeah, I think with that whole community, who I've been really lucky enough to spend time with, guys like Jack Johns and Tom and Matt Smith and the guys at Moy, there's a different kind of single-mindedness that goes into riding waves of the sort that they do, that I just don't need it. I don't have it. I probably don't have the skill set to ride those waves, and I just don't have the desire to do that. But you can see with them, they think about riding waves in a different way, and in a much far more intense way, I think, than my experience of wave riding is.
Yeah. So with the creative stuff that we've been talking about, do you have any concrete ambitions with it? Or is it more just to get into the habit again, or to keep the habit going?
I think I've got airy-fairy visions of writing novels and things like that, which I hope one day I will go through the process of making more concrete. But at the moment, just finding more routine and I think I just listened to your podcast with Chris and talking about deadlines, Chris McLean, and I feel like I just don't have deadlines at the moment.
Yeah, the power of the deadline.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I found this book that I wrote the other day. I mean, it's a guidebook, so it's not it's not a novel, but it was a fucking pain in the arse. And it was like me and two friends wrote it. It was about 15 years ago now. I was cleaning out my office, found it. It's like, oh no way, look at that. And that was like the most stressful deadline of my life. But there's no way on earth I would have written that book without that deadline.
Yeah.
That was like basically, and we had a year to do that, and we still nearly missed it. But yeah, like it is a powerful incentive.
Yeah.
Yeah. So back to the competitive thing, because again, I did speak to a couple of friends, and one that we've got in common, and one of the friends was a bit like asking him about the WSL tour. Is he gonna do it? So when you look at that event, presumably you watched Noosa. How did you feel about it? Did you think it represented your vision of competitive longboarding, what it could be?
Yeah, I think it. Whenever you try and put something that is an expression of freedom, that I think longboarding is a self-expressive way of just being completely free. And when you try and confine that into a competitive framework, you're going to have to sacrifice certain aspects of that self-expression. And I see that happening with the WSL, but that's fine because it's a competition.
Yeah.
The thing that I think it loses is an enjoyment of community and the social aspect of those get-togethers, because there's more on the line. Because now, instead of just winning this fun contest, someone can become a world champion.
Yeah.
And that inevitably will, I think, lead to a bit of a shift in the dynamic. Because the early festivals at Noosa, you'd get sort of 100, 150 longboarders from around Australia, around the world would get together, and you'd sort of party all night and then surf all day, and it was a really enjoyable week of just indulgent surfing and living.
Yeah, like just more session based.
Yeah,
really.
exactly.
And like surfing is.
Yeah, totally. And now watching
with a competition sort of loosely thrown around.
Yeah, and the competition's like it's required because that's what brings everyone together.
Yeah.
But maybe now it's shifted just to more professionalism, and people are going to bed at 9 and waking up at 5 and stretching and which is fine.
Yeah.
Like I can't. There's no point in. I just don't know if that's what I want to do.
Right. Well, you like you described earlier, you've got a pretty good gig right now.
Yeah.
There's a lot of traveling. How much are you on the road? Seems like quite a lot.
It often is a lot. This year I've been at home a lot, and I guess now over the last 6 months I have become more keenly aware of how much I travel.
Yeah.
And the reasons behind travel.
Well, especially if you've got this underlying thing of like, this is actually quite frivolous.
Yeah, totally.
You know,
totally, yeah.
As you kind of described.
Yeah. So a combination of that frivolity and then the carbon emissions of jet setting around the world just to go surfing.
Yeah, you're starting to kind of be aware of that.
Yeah. So I'm about to travel a lot. About to go to Mexico now. I'm going to go to Sayulita with Finisterre, and then 6 weeks later I'm going back to the same town in Mexico to do a contest. But I think so that feels indulgent and a bit kind of why am I doing that? Is there a point to that? So I'm mentally shifting from my global travel, which was a big part of the early days with my sponsorship with Reef, and I'm enjoying more European and UK based travel, places that you can get to in a ferry or car.
You went up to like Western Isles, didn't you? And recently I saw. Still never been up there.
Oh, it's beautiful.
Yeah, it looks amazing. Well, your trip, I was a bit like, I've got to go up there.
Yeah,
it looks great.
It's special.
So you think you might do more of that?
I think so. That's always been my favourite way of travelling anyway, and there's the well trodden path of the kind of driving license at 17 and driving down to Hossegor.
Yeah.
And then going to Galicia or Portugal. Those trips, they were what I grew up doing, and they're definitely what I prefer to do. I'd rather load my van up at home with everything and go somewhere within kind of tangible reach of the UK. That feels a lot more natural to me.
But you've been lucky enough to go to some pretty, you mentioned Sam Bleakley earlier. You guys went to Madagascar, didn't you?
Yeah.
Made a film.
Yeah.
Kind of like you've been privileged to kind of, surf, but also kind of dig into some pretty unusual places, right?
Yeah, definitely. Those are the ones that I think Sam's an expert at finding cultural significance within kind of the surf trip genre, and the trip to Madagascar we took, and then even more so probably the trip to Mauritania that Jack, myself and Iski went on with Sam, that they are a different thing.
What do you mean when you say cultural significance?
I think the motivation for, Sam obviously that he makes his Brilliant Corners films, but the motivation for travel isn't trying to find amazing waves. It's not going on swells. It's not going to surf specific spots. It's going to explore a wider culture that's almost always separate from surf culture, and seeing how our little injection of surf culture on a trip interacts with a local coastal culture wherever we go. Right. And in a place like Mauritania, they basically don't have a coastal culture. They don't interact with the sea at all.
Really?
Yeah. They Mauritanians were historically nomadic people of the Sahara Desert.
Right.
And only recently have they kind of pinned down permanent settlements, and like fishing is just not something that they do.
Right.
They're desert people. So
sure.
So for us going in the sea for them was just mad. They just don't.
No reference points.
Points at all.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
What did they think?
They thought it was. Well, they kind of just weren't really interested.
Right.
It was not. People just don't go in the sea. There's a few expats there that are not expats. No, Thierry is Mauritanian, but French Mauritanian,
right?
Colonial Mauritanian, and he goes in the sea. And there's a few people that surf at a place called Le Wharf, but they basically have to pay the fishermen. There are fishermen that fish off this old wharf that was built in the 70s or something to land cargo. They pay them to stop fishing so that they can surf because their nets are in the lineup. Right. So they kind of they come up with a price that's good for the fishermen. They stop and then they surf, but it's just completely culturally going in the sea is not.
Yeah, it's not a thing.
It's not a thing.
Right.
Yeah.
So do you prefer those trips where you can get that insight as well as the surf?
Yeah. It's definitely more nourishing to come home feeling like you've learnt something and interacted with people on a less of a kind of smash and grab kind of come in, go surfing, go home. kind of way. And I think longboarding lends itself to that kind of travel, because you can go on a really fulfilling surf trip without necessarily having to get amazing waves.
Yeah.
And that's something where I've looked at what Sam's done and realised that the surfing part of it is kind of incidental to the narrative of whatever.
Well, it's a vehicle to get you there, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Basically. Yeah. So have you explored that in some of the writings you've been doing as well then?
Yeah.
Because obviously that's a pretty nice way of linking the two things that you're talking about.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think every trip that I curate,
getting some nice atmospheric rain on the on the metal roof there.
Yeah, we've been used to this in the UK, haven't we?
Yeah,
over the last few weeks.
Sort of like starting to hunker down a little bit.
Yeah. Every trip I go on is there's a narrative there first.
Yeah,
and then kind of the waves come afterwards.
Is that where your work kind of is published then? Because I couldn't really find much. I'd look on, it's looking for your poetry, looking for. I've seen your stuff in Wavelength, obviously, and you've had stuff in like Surfers Journal, right? And is that right? Yeah. But it doesn't seem. I couldn't find a website or anything. Or
no, I don't have a website. This is probably something I need to do.
Well, it's not obligatory, is it? But I just thought it was interesting that it wasn't really. I found an old Tumblr.
Yeah,
that's out there.
Yeah. There's an old Tumblr and just stuff in print, I guess. I published a book of poetry with my mum a few years ago.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, she's a photographer and had a publishing business. So yeah, that's where my poetry's in print.
Right.
But yeah, the work I pitch an idea to a magazine and it gets printed. I wrote something for Finisterre from the trip we did to Galicia. But the surf writing isn't. It's almost a means to an end in that's my job.
Yeah,
is to travel.
You can do it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a rich heritage of it, though. I'd say of all the kind of board sports, action sports, whatever you want to say, skating's got a kind of proper literary tradition, I guess. There are definitely decent writers in skateboarding, but surfing definitely. There's like proper writers around, and there is a nice history of kind of surf travel writing that's kind of got proper legitimate chops. Really, it is out there.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's something that I don't read enough of it I don't read enough contemporary stuff to, I think, create my work and add to the canon in a way other than just sort of going there.
That can be quite a good thing though, can't it? Just generally, if you try to create, because then, just avoid that influence.
I think I always find it difficult with surfing as well. There's this tension with trying to you want to be specific in your writing, but then you layer this mystique into what you're doing as well, because you don't want to name spots and you don't want to say where you're going.
It's definitely parameters.
Yeah,
for sure.
But that's hard as a writer, because if you're somewhere really interesting with really lovely place names and people, and that's like the cornerstone of an interesting piece of writing, I think. But having to then hide that, but still be specific and still weave a narrative that's rooted in place is quite something that I struggle with.
Yeah, well, you definitely placing a few creative blocks in your path, aren't you? There, definitely.
Yeah.
Do you have any influences on the poetry side that because obviously you studied and presumably pretty well versed in the canon?
Yeah.
To use the word you used before.
There was a writer called W.S. Graham, who was a Scottish writer from.
I not familiar.
Yeah, he was relatively obscure in his lifetime. He was from Glasgow and then moved to a village called Madron in West Cornwall, which is actually where I first lived up until I was 3 years old, and it's near Penzance and where I live. But he wrote really beautifully about Penwith and West Cornwall, and was a touchstone for me for incorporating the natural world, but then also human interaction to his writing.
Yeah,
which was something that I've tried to do with my work recently, because when I first started writing, it was all just nature, and that was inspiration for me was just the natural world, but now it's far more on a human level.
Well, where you live is the sharp end of like how that human relationship with landscape is changing in real time, you know, on an industrial level, and how it's affecting people's lives and quality of life, isn't it? You know, that's happening in real time in West Cornwall, and has been happening traditionally for the last couple of 100 years, you know. And I noticed that, you know, there's some stuff on your Instagram which is like clips from, like, I don't even know when it's from, but it's like old clips of people from Cornwall. But like I thought that was really interesting, because it is really showed you like how quickly that world's gone, really, and has changed. And I kind of thought when I was looking at that, and from what you've just said about your work, like it's obviously something that you feel quite keenly, right? That the fact that that's a change in culture, essentially.
Yeah, definitely. I found a lot of my writing recently is I'm attempting to explore the relationship with tourism and that new economy building itself out of the ashes of this kind of industrial past. And
again, you're at you're a lifeguard in Sennin, so you see it every day. Yeah, and presumably, obviously, you see that surface reality of that on the beach, but then clearly will understand the real, you know, effect of that on the community and the environment.
Well, it ties in like conversations with old Cornish folk, and they're like, bloody summers here, roads are clogged up, can't move for tourists, bloody blah, blah, blah. And that patter is something that you can't help but you can like imbibe and just be part of your feeling. Like summers are wonderful, but it's like it's always tinged with that, God, I can't wait for them to go home. And then surfing ties into that as well, because I post pictures from West Cornwall where I love to surf, and then I put a picture up one day, then the next day I'm complaining because it's busy. And then,
well, I was going to say, you know, that's another little contradiction that you've got there, isn't it? Because your job is to promote what you do, and the more that you stay at home and the more that you surf at home, and you're good at it. You know, your Instagram's I always look at it and I'm always like, oh, looks good down there at the minute.
Totally, And I half of my life is sort of delicately chatting to local surfers from Sennin and Gwenver about like what I'm doing, and them going like, oh, I saw you put a picture up the other day, and you're like, yeah, sorry about that.
Yeah.
And then I write about tourists coming in and having house names that are actually just websites for booking companies, and I think there's, from a cultural point of view, there's something to be explored there, and it's starting to be with films like Bait.
I was going to say, you've seen it.
Yeah. Really enjoyed it, and
I thought it was great. I thought it was like, well, I thought it was funny for a start.
Yeah, it was funny,
and also like weird. Yeah, like, you know, like conceptually weird. Like the story's simple, obviously, but the way it was made, I mean, the technical way it's been delivered is very unusual. But I thought it was really great. It's about this, isn't it?
Yeah, you know, it's exactly what it's about.
How did you? So, as a local who's seen that firsthand, because I guess someone like me, I guess if I phrase it a bit differently, come down to Cornwall every year, down here now, you know, total incomer, surf down here, and can clearly see the tension, and it is a bit like, well, what is the solution? Because obviously what's going on down here is the main industry is tourism now, and for right or wrong, the local economy and community kind of seems to rely on tourism. So how can you reconcile those two things with, you know, keeping this culture, which, however jokingly you sort of say it, like, oh, you know, bloody people blocking the roads and all that, it is real and it is a thing, and people are fucked off, right? You know, people feel like they want to protect that part that makes this, you know, such a unique part of the UK, while at the same time making a living off the people that are coming down here. You know, is there a way of sustaining it? Is it something that can be reconciled?
I think with Cornwall occupies quite a unique space within the United Kingdom, because it lacks the autonomy of Wales and Scotland, but retains a feeling of otherness to England, even though politically and structurally it's totally still part of England. But I think that's maybe where the tension from the Cornish people themselves comes from, because they don't have that recognised autonomy to fall back on. So there's a feeling that they need to express their otherness through dissatisfactions of how their home is being treated, and whether that's real or not. I think maybe it's constructed sometimes, that tension.
Right? Really?
Well, last year there was a Porthcurno became really popular, and Pedney especially, because on Instagram or Facebook there was a beautiful video of it looking like the Caribbean.
Right.
And there's
like Treen Beach was. I think I saw it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that was a very like.
Oh right, so that had a real spike, did it? From that.
Yeah.
Right.
Like a brutal.
Because that was always like a little best kept secret. I mean, it wasn't a secret, but it wasn't like where tourists particularly flocked to.
Well, it doesn't make sense. The infrastructure cannot handle people going down there. So it's
a little bit trickier to get to.
Really, hard to get down. Yeah. People, influencers were seeking that place out because it was like a slice of heaven within the United Kingdom. Do
you know what? The first time I went there, little digression, was about 95. And I remember being like, fuck me, how come no one's told me about this? Yeah. Like this is actually England, because beautiful summer day, lovely little waves, blah, blah. Yeah, I mean, it is like a special, Cornwall, let's be honest, at its best it is special. It is beautiful. And it does have that, on those days. Yeah. But I didn't realise that. So that really kind of had a real life impact on like Porthcurno.
The roads were blocked.
Right.
You couldn't get... People were abandoning cars on the road because the road system was blocked. Right. Like with people, like hundreds of cars, standstill traffic, 2 or 3 hours.
No way.
Yeah. Like it was unbearable for people that lived there, and it was unsustainable, that level of that influx of tourism in that particular place at that time. And that was just because of one kind of moment of like, this place is amazing, let's go there. And I think with the age of immediacy that we have at the moment, that sort of thing is going to happen more and more. A place will be in the zeitgeist for a moment, and then it will just be flooded and then forgotten the next moment. And there needs to be some kind of more level-headed approach to tourism in Cornwall, and I don't know what that is.
Yeah.
And that tension, I was saying about the tension before, and sometimes it is kind of manufactured by local people. But
you think it, and you think that's a self-identity thing almost, just a way of like, kind of just putting the flag in the ground a little bit and saying this is who we are. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And I do it. I'm lucky living so far west that I'm out of I don't have to grapple with the A30 on a day-to-day
You're the end of the line, aren't you?
Exactly, yeah. I'm already like it's all the traffic jams are behind me, so I'm fine. But I totally am guilty of being that grumpy bastard who's complaining about the crowds whilst also telling people that they should come because I'm so proud of it.
Yeah.
But I think that grumpiness and that teasiness is a way of saying, I'm from here. Yeah. This is mine. You can't think about it the way that I think about it. Yeah. Because you're other.
I mean, that is fertile creative territory.
Yeah. And I think it's really surprising that there's not actually much been written about that, or there's not much of a heritage there.
Well, I think that's why Bates struck such a chord, isn't it? Because, it is actually, it is a real cultural story in everyone's backyard, isn't it? And there's definitely the acclaim it's got, there's definitely a bit of like, oh, look at this film about Cornwall, there's a bit of like, but he's made a serious point in like in a really, like we say, like funny, affecting way, and that's not easy to do. That you could have done that with a fucking sledgehammer, couldn't you? But it's subtle and it's important, isn't it?
I think that one of the things for me was that the story is so simple. And I think the bravery to run with a story so simple, and something that could, for a Cornish person, everyone moans about houses and second homes and stuff, but to commit to a creative work on that theme.
And that quite like that's sparse as well.
Yeah,
there's hardly any dialogue in it.
Yeah.
Dialogue is just so pithy, isn't it?
Yeah,
and like just like tonally could have like been a bit of a disaster, that film.
Yeah, totally.
But like I really did pull it off.
Yeah.
I'm kind of harping on about it, but I was like, I did think it was really great.
Yeah.
And if you haven't seen it, you should definitely see it. So do you feel, sounds like Cornish identity is pretty important to you then?
Yeah, I think it. Yeah,
very obvious question in the light of what we've just talked about, but do you feel Cornish or English?
I feel Cornish. I feel Cornish and English and European and British.
Yeah, and it's possible to feel all those things.
They can coexist. I
understand that.
Yeah, and that's where I think if they stop being able to coexist, or someone tells it that you can't feel, that those things can't sit alongside each other, that's where dangerous patriotism.
Well, that's another podcast, that one, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah,
we're living it. But we're living it right now. I'm not even going to say the B word.
Yeah, exactly. It's in. I find myself retreating to a space of Cornish identity, especially when I'm traveling and surfing, because the Australian and Californian kind of ideals of surf lifestyle are often put on pedestals for how the beach lifestyle should be lived, and I often am at pains to a certain degree reject that and say there's something else going on in Cornwall, and it's not from the 60s, and it doesn't have that cultural cachet, but there's something else going on.
Yeah, I would buy that completely, because it's younger, isn't it? Firstly,
yeah,
and I actually talked to Steve England quite a lot about this yesterday. But it's a valid point when you're in this part of the world. I think like, we just don't have what they've got, and it's but that's, I almost prefer. I mean, fuck, I surf Brighton. Do you know what I mean? Like, it is like as far from Encinitas as you can physically, and but it's still. I had a better time surfing in Brighton than I did in Encinitas, to be honest. You know what I mean? Like,
I hate California.
Well, like, whatever. Like, it's just, yeah, and that's fine. I think that's a legitimate position. It's perhaps not a position that Joel Tudor would understand, but or people are immersed in, or even give a shit about, but who are immersed in that world to that degree.
Yeah.
But I think there is something like very unique about our weird little scene.
And I think especially within longboarding, and Joel's a big part of this, is there's a lot of importance is put on where you fit into surfing's lineage. Yeah. And Joel is such a student of the history of surfing and longboarding, and my friends who are surfers in Southern California all have personal relations to that timeline of development. Yeah. And as a British surfer, we're just so out of it. Just like neither of my parents surfed. Like, lots of my friends are first generation surfers. Like, we've got no touchstones to that timeline. And then I think the onus then is on us to start trying to just not be in awe of that thing, and not, because I've often just felt like, fuck, I've got nothing to contribute.
Well, I was about to ask you, do you ever feel like, does it affect you as an individual in that world? Because you are in that world, obviously. You're a professional longboarder on the same team as Rob Machado, as you've said. You know what I mean? Like, you are in that world. You are in that industry. So do you feel like, have you ever felt that there was like judgment there, or that you had more ground to make up, or
not really? I think it's sort of often worked in my favour, in that I'm an oddity. Yeah, I'm kind of. People don't expect for me to be British and for there to be waves in England, despite the fact it's an island in the Atlantic. But,
you've got waves?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But I don't think it hasn't worked against me, but you do often feel like you are outside of this intangible thing that people talk about, and they talk about their dads learning to surf and their first boards from blah, 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 blah. And, it's nice. It's nice for me anyway, to feel more to think of myself as Cornish and have that, which is separate from surfing, but something to feel part of.
Yeah. Okay, final question, because well, we're not quite there, but I think we've got time for coffee before you go. Did an hour. So how long do you think you're going to carry on with this lifestyle that you've got, given what we've talked about and, the context of how we've talked about it?
As long as I can.
Good answer.
Yeah.
That's what I was hoping you were going to say.
I mean, I thought it might be coming to an end this year. Reef they've stopped making apparel, so they're just making footwear now.
Right.
And my contract has changed as a result of that. I'm still with them, but on a lesser level. But then, so I thought when that news came through that might be the end of the full-time thing, and that I'd be able to have to look for other aspects of lifeguarding or writing more commercially. But then the Finisterre thing has come in, and that's really helped me. So at the moment, I'm still in the incredibly fortunate position for surfing to be my career. And I think it will just be a gradual shift. Yeah. And hopefully I'll find something equally as enjoyable, but maybe slightly more rewarding in an intellectual sense. Yeah.
Well, thanks for doing it, man.
Thank you very much, Matt.
No worries. So there you go. That was me and Mikey Lay in conversation, and I hope you enjoyed it. Got to thank Mike for being so accommodating that day, actually. Thank you, Watergate Bay, for hosting me on this trip. And thanks a lot, like I said at the beginning, to Open Surf for their hospitality and generosity that day. Anyway, housekeeping corner time. There's quite a lot to get through this week, to be honest. But I'm going to start with a letter I received from Rob last week, which very much made my day. I'm not going to read it all because it was bloody massive. And I really hope you didn't type that out on your iPhone, Rob. Anyway, Rob writes, "Hey Matt, how's it going? Just wanted to drop you a line to say a big cheers for the podcast, really. I've only just got into it the last month or so after a bit of Googling and recommendations from friends. I found some website listing top 10 this or that and found a brief description and a link to your one amongst others. Thought I'd give it a listen. This relatively late discovery has given me the benefit of having a high back catalogue to dive into, which is sweet. Few different big ups for your setup coming. Lack of adverts is great. Sounds like a simple thing, but after listening to a good number, probably 30 odd of your podcast now, it's obviously been a point of contention for you over the years. At the same time, I found yours. I was recommended another similar theme podcast, so I checked out their episode with Jeremy Jones. Couldn't even last the whole episode as the host kept cutting to a commercial plug 3 times during his pre-recorded chat with Jeremy, so he lost me straight away. Thanks a million for not doing this. It makes your setup so much better for sure. I feel your degree of research knowledge of each guest is mirrored in the amazingly well-structured and curated questions you ask. You seem to be able to extract an incredible degree of information and insight from people in a thoroughly intelligent, entertaining and engaging way. Oh, thanks, mate. That's nice. Not just ticking the standard easy to ask, obviously low-hanging fruit, stuff that every other podcast or magazine interview in the world seems to cover, and I get the impression most of your guests can feel this too. I feel that many of the thought patterns, emotions, decisions made, questioned, regret, sacrifices or concepts I've not really thought about too deeply, but are mirrored in many of the areas you discuss with your guests. These chats have not only helped me be aware of these things in my life, but have helped me to understand, process and give context to them, and also be aware that I'm not the only one who's experienced such things. It's given me huge peace of mind and started me down what I feel is a positive path of emotional and personal understanding and growth. So cheers, nice one. Bloody hell, Rob. I mean, how amazing is that? That really does make all those hours chasing slack as fuck possible guests around the world very worthwhile. Thank you very much. Very much appreciated that. As I always say at this point, keep them coming. It's nice when you get them because, you know, that's amazing. So, right, what else is going on? Well, as you might have gathered if you follow me on Instagram over at We Look Sideways, I've decided to step manfully up to the plate and contribute to the, unprecedented amount of online content that is currently being produced out there. I like to visualize said content right now. Do you remember the old EU butter mountains they used to talk about? Remember those? Not just me. The point was there was a lot of butter, supposedly, more than we could ever consume. It's a little bit how I feel about digital content right now. You know, one good thing of this whole crisis is we are living in a time of content bounty. And I've rolled my sleeve up and I've decided to get involved by adding to said content / butter mountain, he said, mangling his metaphor to pieces. But, you've probably all turned off by now anyway, so who cares? So firstly, I've started doing video. Well, Instagram live videos. Now, as long-term listeners will know, I've been grappling with the question of doing filmed interviews for years now. And this situation has finally given me the kick up the arse that I needed. And it's actually turned out pretty well. I started last night, as I record this, with the first ever Type 2 live, which saw me interview my most recent Type 2 guest, Chris Hines, MBE, over on the Patagonia Europe and We Look Sideways Instagram accounts. I've got to say, it was great. I really enjoyed it. We had a lot of people listening, sending comments and questions, and generally being really lovely about the conversation. I got compared to Chris Martin only once. There's a lot of people going, oh yeah? Yeah, can you believe it? We got one okay boomer, which made me laugh. But generally it was great. So I'm going to be doing them every Friday, these Type 2 lives now. You can check them out by following me on Instagram. This is the third time I'm going to say it, over at We Look Sideways. Or if you missed it, by looking at my IGTV, where I'll be posting each episode, when I've worked out, should I say, how to do that. I managed to mess up the first one by not saving it properly, but I've worked out a way to doing that. So I'm going to put them on Instagram TV. I'm going to put them on YouTube as well. Fuck it. I'm going to start a YouTube channel, something else that I've been asked to do for years. And the reason I quite like this is because it's not just me filming the normal episodes and repeating them. It's new, it's different stuff that accompany the episodes. So I'm quite happy about that. And after all, I've got a lot of time on my hands. So I'm gonna launch a YouTube channel. Can you believe it? And I also finally got around to sorting out the Looking Sideways blog that I've been thinking about doing for years. I did start it a few years ago and then I let it slide. But it's by the time this comes out, it should be up there on my website. A blog, how very old-fashioned. I'll be posting the odd piece myself. But mainly I've asked guests to contribute their own 5 things and what they've been doing to get through this. So Mikey, this episode, is doing his 5 favourite poems. I've had people doing music books. Favourite football shirts, which was a bit random. That was Chris McLean. I didn't realise how into football he is, but he is, which, for me has already made setting up the blog worthwhile. So you can find the blogs by heading to my website over at www.wearelooking.sideways.com, or you can head to the link in my Instagram, click that, and it should lead you to the blogs. Oh, that was my Bluetooth speaker having a little wobbler. Anyway, I'll be following these with more Instagram live chats with those guests about their 5 things. So the first of these is going to be with Ed Lee, which will have happened by the time it comes out. But again, I'm just going to bang them up on Instagram as they happen. Split screen Instagram live interview alert. And we'll be saving those to Instagram TV and again, YouTube, like I'm saying. So it's going to be content a go-go. I feel a bit like Gary V over here, with me YouTube and me Instagram TV and me Instagram live and me podcasts. And, I might even end up getting back on Facebook at this point. Anyway, there's a lot going on. You got to keep busy, aren't you? So, I'm still doing the podcast as well. I'll be back next week with another episode. Hopefully the final one of that Cornwall series, if I can persuade this guest to let me put the episode out, because they've also decided that they weren't that keen on it. But, we'll see. In the meantime, enjoy your week. I hope you're keeping safe, even and healthy. Nice one.